Everybody as the Rosh Hashiva, the Gadol, who looked like a football player because he wore. Does anybody know how many pairs of tzitzis he wore? So he always looked huge. He was really a small little man. 18 pairs.
I believe.
No, it's got to be more than that.
Yeah, it's got to be more.
Well, maybe it was 18 cotton and 18 wool.
Could be. So Chaim Tzvi is here, and Chaim Tzvi learned by Chaim Pechasharvi. He was a Talmud. So Chaim Tzvi is going to share some memories of the tzaddik of going to Chaim Pechasharvi.
So first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our little Rebbe over here, our Maggid Shir. You know, the time that
it's not my irritate.
Huh?
It's not my irritate.
The time that he spends in front of the camera is dwarfed by the amount of time that he spends off the camera preparing. And at the same time, I'd like to thank the Chabura because our little group that gets me up at 5:30 every morning. So that being said, I went to Torah or Shlomo actually was the one who told me to go to Torah, and I went for the summer's month. So the summer's month was just after Pesach. So in order to get in, they told me to speak to a fellow by the name of Morley Orbach. I'm sure everybody here, some of the guys here remember Morley Orbach. He was a fascinating.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but then Rav Scheinberg, Rav Scheinberg came to Toronto by Pesach, and he made up with my father, that the tuition that he's going to pay. My father wasn't doing too well in business at the time, and he asked Rav Scheinberg what he could do. So Rav Scheinberg asked him what he could do. So he said, well, he put it towards the Rosh Hashiva. So he said, Rav Scheinberg saw who he was dealing with. That it's really, really very difficult. As a matter of fact, it's very difficult, even though my father lived in a beautiful home at the time. So you never know how things are going. Rav Scheinberg said to my father very simply, he said, you know what? It cost you a certain amount of money to feed Chaim Tzvi here in Toronto, right? Whether you send him to yeshiva or not, you're gonna have to pay that money. So give me that money. Whatever money it cost you to feed him in Toronto, give it to me. Give me the money to feed him in Eretz Yisrael. My father thought that was very fair. It was very kind of Yeshiva, and I went. The following Pesach, I was in Yeshiva, so I wasn't witness to this story. But again, Pesach rolled around, and the Rosh Yeshiva came to my father to ask him for this money that was never forthcoming, right? That somehow never made it to Eretz Yisrael throughout the year. So my father said, it's so difficult. So Shlomo says, listen, I'm going to give you a bracha that you should make more and more and more. And my father said, it's still difficult. Shlomo said to my father, listen, Alex, let me tell you a story. There was a younger man in Eretz Yisrael, and he wanted kinderlach. Everybody wants kinderlach, but he needed kinderlach because he came to me about this problem because he was already married for 10 years and there were no kinderlach. After I schmoozed with him a little bit, and I saw that we didn't have any real medical issues that would impede him to have kids, I told him that it costs me $500 a month to support one of my Yungalite in Koil. If you give me $500 a month, which is to support one Yungaman, I'll give you a bracha that you should have a child in a year. So the younger man said, Rosh Hashiva, I don't have $500 a month, and if I'm gonna make such a commitment, I'm gonna have to go out and borrow this money. So I told him, no, don't go borrow on my behalf. So he says, okay, it's a deal. We shook hands, and 6 months later he comes back to me complaining because he's been beautifully giving you the money every single month. It's now already almost $3,000, and the last and he doesn't hear any news. His wife is telling him that there's no news. So I told him, give me the next payment. You'll see it'll be okay. And 6 months later, she told my father, 6 months later he actually had a child. He had a child in the 6th month. So I'm telling you here, Alex, my brochus, right, are Kadosh Baruch Hu listens to me, right? Please help me allow your son to learn. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of his brochus, but of who he was in terms of holiness. But another thing I want to share with you just before we start to learn, if I can abuse the time a little bit, is there was a time when the Rosh Hashiva lamented when we didn't show up on time to one of his shiurim. And he was telling us how we don't appreciate his efforts that it takes to keep the lights on, to keep the heat on. Even though the Rosh Hashiva was basically complaining about this to us, and this was part of his food, we're not taking the learning seriously enough. It didn't really make much of an impression on me. We're basically, now that I look back at it, we're 20-year-old little kids, right? But why do I remember this complaint of Rosh Hashiva so vividly? It's because that Bein Hazmanim, a cousin of mine, took a trip to California, and he found himself in a small shul outside in the countryside over there. And he called me up and he says, I'm in this small shul. There's probably maybe about 7 or 8, 10 old men. And a Meshulach comes down the aisle with a pushka. And you wouldn't believe who this Meshulach was. So I said, I got no idea. Who could it have been? He says, it was your Rosh Hashiva. Your Rosh Hashiva was coming down with a pushka, collecting nickels and dimes, let's say dollars, whatever it was. And when I heard that the Rosh Hashiva, I knew he was all over the world. But I knew that even this is part and parcel of his commitment to the yeshiva to keep it up and to keep it running. That all of a sudden took on a whole new form. So listen, he's a Koine Baruch, and with that, I'd like to conclude. He was a holy man, he was a holy Jew, and he was a tremendous masculine, tremendous Talmud Chacham.
And she should follow us. Chaim Tzvi left out the best part of the story.
Right. Did he ever pay up or what?
No, the best part of the story was when Chaim Tzvi's father told us over to Yid from Toronto. Yid from Toronto says, I have a better idea. How about you give him a bracha and he gives you money? Okay. Let's see the Heilige Gemara Vayter. I believe that we are up towards the bottom of Kuf Yud Amud Beis. If I'm not mistaken, today's daf is Kuf Tes. I think today's daf is Kuf Tes or Kuf Yud.
Probably Kuf Yud.
So we're a blot ahead, I would say, which is perfect. So let's see what the Gemara says over here. We were talking about the different levels of things that are matzah. So we're talking about zugos, and the Gemara discussed if you had 2 koishes of wine, which were zugos, and then you wanted to make it into number 3 with sheikh or with beer. Since beer is of a lower level, it doesn't combine with the previous 2. On the other hand, if you had 2 glasses of beer and then you had 1 of wine, which is an upgrade, that would be mitzaref. The simonech, and in order to remember this concept that a higher value product will combine with the lower value product, but not vice versa, you could remember this with remembering a Mishnah in Kalim. Ze'aklal, kol ha'mechubaloi min ha'chomer mimenu, tamei min ha'kal mimenu tar. I just find it interesting how, if you want to remember this easy, you just refer to the Mishnah in Kalim, because everybody knows that. So what does it say in the Mishnah in Kalim? In order for a baguette to be metama, the moishets, if you sit on it, it has to be a minimum size. And depending on what the baguette is made out of, it needs to be a certain size. So leather would have to be a smaller size to be able to be considered a choshev, a place that you would sit on, but the sack would be bigger, would need a bigger size. So what would happen if you had two minim? One of them you needed to have, let's say, 5 tefachim of a baguette in order for it to be significant, and one you would need 6 tefachim of this baguette for it to be significant. So what would be the halacha if I had 5 tefachim of a baguette that I needed 6 tefachim of? So I'm 1 tefach short. So I sew onto it, I add to it another piece of baguette but a piece of beged from a beged that you would only need 5 tvachim for. So the Mishnah says surely that's mitzaref, because the beged that only needs 5 tvachim, it's of a higher grade. So therefore, for sure, it will be mitzaref. But on the flip side, if I had a beged that needed 5 tvachim, and I only had 4 tvachim of that beged, and I sewed onto it a piece of beged that the beged would need 6 tvachim, that beged would not be mitzaref, because I guess its concentration is a little bit lower, and therefore it wouldn't be mitzaref to be mashlim the shear of the bigger beged. Amar Rab Nachman, Amar Rav. Trei kama taka, 2 glasses of wine before the meal, the chara taka, and 1 glass of wine during the meal, mitztarfe would be mitztaref. Chad mikame taka, utrei ataka, but if you had 2 glasses of wine before the meal, 1 before the meal, but trei ataka, and 2 during the meal, that would loy be mitzaref. It's not mitzaref. I don't understand what is the fact that it's in the Suda have to do anything. It's negeya if you make a bracha on it, it's negeya if it's part of the Suda. But are we trying to make something part of the Suda? We don't care if it's part of the Suda. We're just looking at him. How many koshes did he have? The gaver kamiskin, the koi. And if somebody has 3 koshes, so it wasn't sugas. Why should it have anything to do with whether or not it's part of the Suda, it's not part of the Suda? Zaktamor the Chula Alma and Chadami. Everybody agrees that has nothing to do with it. So the Chula Alma, Trey Ataka, the Chadla Basar Taka, if you have 2 during the meal and 1 after the meal, that's loy mitzaref. That's for sure not mitzaref because of Zugais. He Maise the Rabbi Bar Nachmani. Because there was a story with Rabbi Bar Nachmani who had 2 koshes by the Suda. They took away the table because he was going to be benching. And because of Zugais, the Gemara says that his face went to the back of his head. And I've seen those things happen on Purim. His face went to the back of his head, which was a crisis to him. And he told them, bring the table back so it will extend my meal, and then I'll have another kos. He didn't just have another kos. He actually had to have them bring the table back. So it proves that if you had 2 koshes during the meal, the 3rd kos would also have to be during the meal. You can't just have a random 3rd kos. And that's because of the story, it proves it.
Yosy,
I'm sorry?
Wouldn't this also be contingent on what I was asking yesterday about what's considered a hefsek or not?
What's considered a hefsek?
Yeah, like if you
Yeah,
started
that
before the
is what
meal.
they're discussing.
I mean,
That
yeah,
really is what they're
it's not
discussing.
really saying like before the meal. So what does that mean before the meal? Like he drank it and then he started his meal and then he drank 2 in the middle of the meal. Like
Yeah, he had kiddush. He had kiddush, and then during the meal, he had another one.
Okay, so we're talking
People
about
used to
kiddush
drink
here.
before-
Talking about kiddush here.
Well, it's not talking about kiddush, but it was normal in those days that people drank. People had cocktails before they started the meal.
Yeah, when you sat at the bar waiting for your reservation to be ready, those days.
I remember the days when I sat at the bar and I didn't wait for anything other than just the bar.
Anything that you mix, that you have to dilute. So Rashi says, the Rashbam says, yain mozug, v'yachach shosha mashka mozug acher. If you drank wine, which is normally diluted, and you drank some type of other mashka that also needs to be diluted, it will be mitzaref. Hamozug mitzaref bein l'roa bein l'toiva. Why? Even the tavayim mezugin kemin echad chashivi u'mitzarfi. We consider it like 1 minute. Chutz min hamayim, except for water. Water, even though it's mozug, it won't be mitzaref. What does it mean, mozug? Why would you put water into water? What are you diluting? So Rashi tells us if you had cold water and hot water, and you put cold water into hot water to cool it off, or vice versa, that's not called mozug, and that wouldn't be mitzaref with another mashka that's a mozug. Even water would be mitzaref, because it's considered mozug. If you want to consider water mozug, that it should be mitzaref with wine that's mozug, that's only at least if it's cold into warm or warm into cold. So you're actually changing the status of the water that you're mixing it into. That's for sure not considered mozug. There's 4 things. So one who does them, his his blood is on his head. He's responsible. He himself is responsible for his misfortune. And he's chayiv with his nefesh because of what he did. Elohim, hanifne bein dekel lekoisel. If one relieves himself between a dekel and a wall, and we're going to see this is because this is where shadim hang out, and if you're busy, if you're doing your business there, you're sort of squeezing the shade out of his place, and even though normally the shade won't come after you, but if you get in his space, he's going to defend his turf.
Squeezing the shade out of the shade.
I'm sorry.
You're squeezing the shade out of the shade.
That's right. That's right. The over ben shnei dekalim, and if you walk in between two palm trees, that's also squeezing him out of his turf. And if one drinks water that he borrowed from somebody, and that's because they want that water. The over al mayim shfuchen, and if you walk over water that was poured out, even if it's his wife who poured it out, which means we have no need to assume that there was any type of spell cast on it. It's his own water. He's still not supposed to walk over it. So to Gemara, this that we said that if you choose the wrong place to relieve yourself, you'll cause yourself a problem. That's only if there's no arba amis. If there's no 4 amis, then the shade has nowhere to go. But if you left 4 amis, then if there's 4 amis there, then there's room for you to do yours and for him to get by. And if there's no arba amis, still if there's no other way to go, if there's some other route that the shade could pass by, then there's no problem. But if you don't leave him any other place to go, then now you're in his turf and you're messing up his path. That's why he goes after you.
Yes, is that Rashi? Yes, I think you're reading Rashi, isn't there?
You're right. You're right. I am reading Rashi. I'm sorry.
Not that it's a bad thing. I'm just.
You're right. I was reading Rashi. The problem, I can't get the camera in 2 places at once. Okay. Let's go weiter.
I find it interesting that we're using physical terms against shadim, which are spiritual beings, but it seems from these Gemara that they're not entirely.
They have some
spiritual.
That's right.
We're talking physical ideas.
I'm going to learn. They have children. They have family. There's a whole matzah with it. The whole party going on in the underworld. Okay. Now, one who goes in between 2 palm trees, that's only if there's no Rishis Harabim in between them as well. Because they don't like being in public places, so they're not going to bother you if you're in a public place. That's only if you borrowed it from a cotton. You borrowed it from a cotton. Even if you borrowed it from a cotton, that's only in the field. There's not a lot of water available in the field. The shadim want that water, and therefore, if you take that water, he gets upset at you. But in the city where there's plenty of water available, less lamba, there's no problem. For someone, I guess they like borrowed water. Maybe Shulun is close enough. I don't know. Okay, let's see what it says right here. That's only with water because they only drink water. Less they won't bother you for wine or beer. If you walk over poured out water, it's not a problem. That's if you didn't throw some earth into it, or if you didn't spit into it. One or the other, less lamba, there is no concern. That's only if the sun didn't pass over it. And if 60 steps didn't walk over it. If the sun went over it, and 60 steps, I think it's one or the other, less lamba. And let's see if he says, no, he does not say over here. Okay,
They're
weiter.
like Dracula. They don't like the sun.
I'm not sure how do shadim work or what their preferences are. I don't have any explanation for these, and the Rashbam doesn't explain it either. So I guess it's very hard for us to understand these things.
Isn't there a Hasidic minhag on Pesach to throw water in the street and then dance over it? Is that only in Mea Shearim?
I know by Kriyas Yamsuf, when you go to the Rav's house,
Kriyas Yamsuf.
Kriyas Yamsuf,
Yeah.
which is the night of
They do it in
Shvisha
the house,
Pesach,
too.
the Rav splashes water around. He takes a vashtable of water and he splashes it into the vashtable, and that's our Kriyas Yamsuf.
Okay, I just seem to remember in Mea Shearim, they like spray water in the street and then they just
That's
dance
when they
over
do sponge every Friday afternoon. If you walk down the Mea Shearim, you can get
No, she's Shel Pesach, but I just they
Could
jump
we-
over the water. I don't know.
I guess you're not supposed to go over the water. Yeah.
I think, Yossi, I think it just comes from what you said earlier. They're looking for water, and they go after the water that are held by a cotton because it's easy to get out of, or if it's on the ground. But even the Shadim have limits. They don't want heated up water or stepped on water or
Even they have standards.
yeah.
This is only a problem to go over it if you're walking over it. But if you're riding a donkey, or like Simon Sani is not wearing shoes, but if you're wearing shoes of a Racham Chamer, Simon Sani, less lamba, there won't be a problem. The Hanamili, this is only lagabe a mazik, a shade bothering you. So Hanamili hechaleka lemeches l'kshafim. We're not worried about kshafim. Remember, we learned yesterday that these witches with a capital B, they're gonna set a spell on you. They're into spelling bees. That's why it's a witch with a capital B, because she's trying to do a spelling bee on you, right? Aval heicha the eagle lemeches l'kshafim aval gav dika kol hani. Even if you have all these mitigating factors, chashinan, it's going to be a problem. Who gabra the Rachav Chamer v'Sayim Misani. Once upon a time, somebody actually was riding on a donkey and wearing shoes. And what happened is the Gomer Misani, his shoes shriveled up, the Tzavu Kare, and that caused his shoe shrunk and his foot shriveled up. Tanarabon, Shloisha Ein Mimatin. There's three types of people that you're not allowed to go in between them if there's two of them. And they're not allowed to go in between two of you. The Eluhain. Let me make sure I got them right. Which one is Mismatzin? Mismatzin is Lo Yaver Beishnei Anoshim, so they shouldn't go in between you. Lo Mismatzin is you shouldn't go in between them. So what shouldn't you go in between, and what shouldn't go in between you? The Eluhain Hakelev. So you shouldn't walk in between two dogs, nor should you allow a dog to walk in between two men. Vadekel and a palm tree. Ve'isha. The Yeshayim Af HaChazir, and there are those who say also a Chazir. The Yeshayim Af HaNochosh, and there are those who say even a snake. It's very interesting to note that there's a whole shaila here. They use this Gemara, the shaila, if you're allowed to bury a man in between two women. There's a whole shaila about it. There's a lot of shittas about it. And there's even a shaila, if a person buys a grave, they put him in between two women, if he could force the Beis HaKvar, so he could force the Chaver Kadisha to give him a different grave. Anyway, but even matzah in Maitakanti, what happens if you walk in between two women? Now you're zapped. What should you do? Amar Papa, what you should do is you should say a pasuk that niftach bekel but nafsek bekel. You should say a pasuk that starts with the word kel and ends with the word kel. The pasuk that Rashbam suggests is kel ma'itziam mitzrayim k'sayavas ra'im loy k'leinachash b'Yaakov l'kasam b'Yisrael k'eisei amar l'Yaakov l'Yisrael ma'pol kel. So it's not one pasuk. You have to find a series of sukkim that begin with a kel and end with a kel. Inami niftach beloy, but niftach beloy, or it starts with a loy and ends with a loy. And this pasuk that the Rishbam suggests is lo ish kel v'chazei v'benodam v'yisnechem who amar v'layasa v'diver v'loy yikimen. It didn't really end with a loy, but I guess that counts because the Rishbam says that's a good pasuk. Tosha suggests some other psukim. Okay, so that's your eitzah, how you avoid it. Okay, let's see where we're up to. Okay. Inami niftach v'loy v'nafsek v'loy. Hani bei trei, the matzalahu isha nida. Two people that a woman who is a nida walked in between them. Im tchilas nidasi, if it's the beginning of her period, then hayreges echad mehen. One of them will get killed. Im soif nidasa, if it's the end of her nida period, then then Mariva Aisha Benem, these two people who she walked in between will get into a fight. My takante, how do you fix this problem? Again, niftach bekel v'nafsik bekel. You say those psukim, and that will heal. That will heal the situation. Hani trei nashi. There were two women.
How would they know?
I'm sorry.
How would one know?
If you walked in between two women.
How do you know? No. How do you know if they are Anita or not?
Oh, how would he know what they are?
Yeah.
In those days, they used to wear special begodim, I think. Yeah, in those days, they used to wear special begodim, so it was obvious. It's hard for us to imagine.
One beged for the beginning of the Nida and one for the end of the Nida.
No, I guess he would have to ask her, are you at the beginning or at the end?
Exactly.
Very uncomfortable. In those days, they had different type of standards of social, different social standards. Okay. If you're walking down the street and there's a split in the road, there's a fork in the road, and you see one woman on one side, on one shoulder, and another woman on the other side of the shoulder, and they're facing each other, you know that they're in the middle of a spelling bee, and therefore you need to protect yourself. How do you protect yourself? You have to build a force shield around you, a magnetic force shield protecting you from it. If there's an exit before there, get off and take a detour. If Waze cannot find you, they should have a symbol on Waze for two ladies doing kishuf. You on Waze you push when there's a hazard, so you should push it. But if there is no other way, if you're not traveling alone, if you have someone with you, the hold hands. Again, that's not so socially acceptable. You have to hold hands with some man walking down the street.
That's it.
Yes.
I meant to also ask you the previous case and this case also. Does it matter like how far the distance is between them?
Between the two women?
Yeah.
Well, it says on the path, so I'm not sure how big. I doubt they had like 12-lane highways in those days, but they had it was a road.
I'm sure there's a certain distance where it wouldn't matter. Right?
I mean, the transmission between them is limited. I don't know.
Okay.
I do not know. The limit of Arshka,
Wi-Fi doesn't reach that far. He wants to know what the
or the Bluetooth connection.
Bluetooth.
What is the nechlafu? They have to hold their hands for nichlafu. Does anybody say what? Does anyone have an Arshko? It's attached to the word v'nichlafu?
And pass through them.
And pass through them. Okay. And if you don't have anyone to go with, Neima Hachi, you should say the following chant: Igris, Islis, Asa, Belusia, which are the names of. Well, this is not Hungarian, by the way.
Sounds like a Dr. Seuss book.
So these are the names of four shadim. Miskatla bechik kaval. They should be killed with their arrows. That's what the Rashbam teaches. Should be killed with arrows. Where is it? They're already killed. These four shadim are already dead. This is what my Rebbe heard from his Rebbe and from his Rebbe. Okay, Dr. Gemara weiter. If you bump into a woman who's coming out from the mikveh, if he ends up having relations with his wife first before she does, then he's going to be inflicted with a terrible passion of znus that's going to push him to do affairs. Then, but if she ends up having relations first, then how do you fix that? You should say the following pasuk: Shoifich buz al nadivim v'yasim b'soyu loidarach. Hashem throws humiliation on big, powerful people, and turns them on a bad path. If he says that, that'll solve his problem. Now, Tosfos has a big problem with this Gemara because Tosfos tells us that Rabbi Yochanan used to do that. Is it Tosfos over here? It's not Tosfos over here. But Tosha somewhere asks that Rabbi Yochanan used to sit by the mikvah because he was very good looking, so that the women should see him, and the women will then have very good looking children. So Tosha's answers three things.
Bump into them.
Oh, so either well, poke doesn't mean physically hit them; it means he encountered them suddenly. But that's one of the Tosha's Jerusalem. He was sitting there and waiting. He didn't suddenly encounter them, and that's why this halacha does not apply. That's one reason. Another reason is that he wasn't right there. He was like a little bit down the block, so it wasn't the first thing that she saw when she came out of the mikveh. And the third answer is Rabbi Yochanan was an adam gadol admoid, and he didn't have these problems of achzasai ruach zanuna.
If the whole town ended up looking like Rabbi Yochanan, that would create another problem.
If everyone looks like the milkman, it's not nice.
Yeah.
Tosha asked a very important kasha before. Tosha asked a very important kasha before, where you use psukim to avoid a problem of hezek. So Tosha goes back that says niftach bekel when you have to use a pasuk that starts with kel, not with kel. Pirush Rashbam kel moitzim and mitzrayim v'niftach beloi is lo yish kel v'chazi. Frek Tosha sakasha. V'aval gav the also lis rapish b'divrei Torah. You're not allowed to use words of Torah as a refuah. And for Tosha lahagin shari. Here you're not healing yourself. Here you're just protecting yourself from harm. But the Mirim Pek B'Ma'isha L'ishta Tzamirta Lishko Sakina V'Leima V'Yibrim Moshe Asurin Avera B'Shub Sakana Shari. There were in Shabbos where it was allowed, there was a Mamish Sakana. V'Vein Tam Pirish Niftach B'Kele Mahachi. He used a different pasuk Kele L'Kim Hashem Atzleini Kara Mikol Nezek Asher B'Yadcha Koyach Gvura Ki'ata Kel. Niftach B'Loi is like the Cheni Alakai Lo Tazveni Shameni Kishim Basayin Temeker Taneni V'Al Tameloi. What the Baron Tam is saying is these psukim are not stam psukim. They're psukim of tefillah to their Rebbeinu Shalom to please protect me. That's not called lisrabish b'divrei Torah. That's called davening to the Rebbeinu Shalom so that the Rebbeinu Shalom should save us, and that's why it's not a problem. It's not off north. It was brought down by I think I saw it in the Mesivta. And the Rebbe Elphus book it also, so it's not here. Maybe it's by the Gemara by Richard. Amr b'tzaki, my dichsiv. It says in the pasuk, "Gam ki elech begates al mobes." Even if I'm in a bad situation, lo yidada ki atoymod. Even if I'm in a deep valley, Hashem is with me. I'm not afraid. This is referring to Zeh Yashon B'Tseil Dekel Yechidi. This is someone who sleeps underneath the shade of a single dekel. Like Duvi Mezlavsky said before, it's the shade of a shade. So the shadim like hanging around in the shade. They're shady characters. So if there's a single dekel with a shadow and you sleep in the shadow, you're causing a problem once again because they like lurking in the shadows. And if you hog up their space, then you're displacing them, and they're going to defend their turf.
Does dekel here mean a regular tree or just a palm tree?
I think it means a palm tree.
So regular trees are okay.
I think so. Yeah, just a palm tree. Yeah. Ubetzel levana. And in the shadow of the moon, which means there is moonlight and then there's shadow from moonlight. So they lurk in the evenings and the nighttime when in the shadow from the moon. And this that we said, Dr. Rabbi Yitzchak, that you shouldn't be in the shadow of an individual dekel, tula the chavri eluya. That's only if there's not the shade of another tree that's intersecting this tree, which would then give you an escape route. Then there's not a problem. Frank the Gemara, we looked at different price. If you slept in the shadow of a dekel yechidi, but only in the chotzer, it says. It doesn't say anywhere. In the chotzer, or if someone sleeps in the shade of the moon, so let's analyze this brisa that we just quoted. If the case of Ayashim B'Tseil Dekel Yechidi B'Chatzer is where there was no other shade intersecting it, like Rabbi Yitzchak wanted to argue, well then Afilu B'Sada Nami. Even if it's in the Sada, according to Rabbi Yitzchak, that would not be a concern. Elav Shmamina B'Chatzer Afal Gab the Nafal Tul the Chavri Luya Shmamina. In the Chatzer, even if it's like it's in the Yishuv, not up out in the field, even if there's the shade of another tree intersecting this shade, it still would be a problem. Shema mina. This is how we said in the shadow of the moon, it's dangerous. That's only at the end of the month when the moon is on the eastern horizon, so the shadow would be on the west side of anything that blocks the moon. But at the beginning of the month, where the moon is on the western horizon, and therefore the shade from the moon would go towards the east, less laba, it won't be a concern. I don't know exactly where Shadim went during the first half of the month. I don't know where they hung out, but they definitely weren't in the shade, at least on the moon shade.
Under the trees, right?
Yeah. Okay, you're right. Maybe they stand in the trees. Hi, man. The mafne agirda the dikla. If someone goes to the bathroom on a cut down palm tree, so he's going to suffer with after the day ruach palga. He's going to suffer from ruach palga. There's a little shiloh what ruach palga means. One of the Rishonim learned he's going to be paralyzed halfway, and one of them learns there's some type of machal that his face is going to turn around. Either way, it's not something that we would want to experience. But I'm on the matla ratio. If someone leans his head on a cut down tree, it could be it means a stump. But give me this cut. So ruach tzroda. He's going to suffer from ruach tzroda. That's ka'ev chatzei rosh. That's a bad headache in half of his head. Haman the pasei dikla. If somebody walks over a cut down dekel tree, imiktel kato. If the tree died by itself, then kato. I'm sorry, if it was chopped down, then he will get killed. Iyakar, if the tree had been uprooted, then mi'akar mais, he will be uprooted and he will die, which is even worse than just being killed. Let's see if he says ilan neragish, inekar ilan ha'ishmeis. No, so he will be murdered if the tree was cut, but if the tree was uprooted, then he'll just die. That's only when he walks over it if he doesn't actually step on it itself. But when you walk over the stump, when you walk over the log, you actually step on it, less lamba, it wouldn't be a problem. There's 5 types of shades that could cause problems. Tula the dikla yechida, which we discussed, the shade of a single dekel tree. Tula the chanda, the tula of a chanda tree. Tula the parcha, the tula of a parcha tree. Tula the zardasa. And then ikadamri af tula the arba, even the shade of a boat. So if you're near a boat and it shades you, and the tula the arvasa, and the shade of an arava tree. Klala the milsa, the general rule with what type of shades are dangerous is called a novish anfe. If it has a lot of branches, kashi tule, its shade will be harmful. The called the kashi silve, and if its wood is bad, if its wood is cause problems. I think most of the Mefarshim explain it's because it has thorns, so it means it's wood that can cause trouble. So then any tree that its wood is harmful, and I think the article says because it has thorns, so too its shade will be harmful. Levar michrumasa, except for chumasa. Avagav the kosher silver, even though its wood is harmful, loy kosher tulay, its shade is not harmful. The Amr law, Shida Levra, because a shade was once overheard telling her son, I would stay far away from the tree of Chumasa, the Ilhu de Katalavuch, because your father, my late husband, or my one night stand, got killed from this tree, the Katal today, and it's going to kill you as well. So here you have a family structure where a mother shade is telling baby shade that they be careful where you go. I don't want you to get hurt. You know, we're afraid of shadim, but human shadim are afraid of humans. It's like Jackie Mason always says that if you ever see a yeshiva bacher, you see often a yeshiva bacher walking down the street and sees a whole group of shvartzes, he panics, he runs to the other side. You ever see a group of shvartzes walking down the street and they see a group of yeshiva bacher, they say, help, we better run away, there's a group of yeshiva bacher there. It doesn't happen. But by Shadim, you see, it does. Amar Rav Ashi, Chazina Rav Kahana, the Parish Mukulatuli. I noticed that Rav Kahana stays away from all types of shades. He doesn't want to get into trouble. Zokta Moravite, Bei Parchi Ruchi. What is the name of the shadim that hang around by the Parchi tree? The name is Ruchi. The Vezar Dosa, Shida. That's the name of the shade. The Veigri, Rishbi. Lamai Nafkamina. Why do I need to know the name of the shade that hangs out of each of these different trees? So tomorrow the Kameya. You need to know if you write a Kameya to protect yourself from shadim. I don't know how these things work. You have to know which shade you're addressing, and therefore you need to know how to write a Kameya for which tree. The Beiparchi, the shade of the Beiparchi is a barrier she'ein lo einayim. That shade doesn't have eyes. Lamai Nafkamina. Why would I care if the shade who hangs around at the Beiparchi tree has eyes or not? Luxuzilla, because you could run away from it. Because if you run away, it can't catch you because it doesn't know where to go. Zim Nachada, once upon a time, have also Tzover Marabon Lafnuye Lebeiparchi. Talmud Chacham had to relieve himself by a parchi tree. Shama de Ka'asa Iluya, and he heard that the shadim were coming to get him. The Gazila, and he ran away. He Azla, when he ran away, when the shade was chasing him, the shade couldn't see where it was going, so it bumped into a decal. It held onto a decal. Savach dikla, the dikla cried out, upakahi, and the shade died. Similar to the story with the fellow who got inflicted by kshafim from his ex-wife, where it happened to him. Parcha the Vezardasa, shady. I'm sorry. Right. So here also whatever it meant there, it means here. The Vezardasa shidi, ha zerdasa the smicha lamasa. If you have a zerdasa that's near the city, loipichsa mishitin shady. It's going to have at least 60 shadim. So these trees that have the shady connected to them, the ones that are near the city will have 60. So they're particularly dangerous. If you write a kameya, you can't just write a kameya for one. You got to write a kameya for 60. You have to write a kameya that's going to deal with multiple shadim. And we have a story to illustrate that. Ahu bar kasha de masa. There was Rashi Rashbam says he was like a watchman, or could be he was the mayor. The Ozul v'koi gaber Zerdasa, he was walking near Zerdasa. Davasamach lemasa, and this tree was near the city, which means it was one of those trees that would have had 60 mazikim. Olu beishitin shady, v'istakim. So the 60 shadim started up with him, and he was in grave danger. So also lahumer abanam the yoda did Zerdasa the shitin shidi. He went to a rebbe to write him a kameya, but this rebbe wasn't informed. He didn't go to Harry Potter school, so he didn't know that these trees have 60 shadim. So because of la kameya lachadashida, he only wrote one skilla. Dios nach chicken jechad nach skillas. He wrote a kameya that was only for one shade. Shamu de tala chimbe begave. He heard that the shadim were hanging a chinga. What is a chinga? Let's see, what chinga is. They hung. I think it was an instrument. Yeah, it was some type of instrument. They were actually partying these shadim, and the ka mashru hachi, and they were singing this way. Sudre Demar. This Rebbe wore a special beged, like Rebbe's wore a special yarmulke, a special shmat on its head. So Sudre Demar, he turva marabonon. This Talmud Chacham who thinks he knows how to write kameyas that are anti-shades, bedikne bebemar, we checked them out. The yoda baruch ata. So the yoda baruch. He didn't even know the bracha. There's a special bracha you make of malvish what's the bracha you make on the sudar? Baruch oita yisrael b'safara. This guy doesn't know aleph beis. Basically, they were making fun of him that he doesn't know aleph beis because he didn't know how to write a proper kameya to expel them. So asa humer abanon the yoda the zardasa shitin shady hava. Then a new Rebbe came along who knew that there's 60 shadim by this tree, and he wrote this mayor a proper kameya. Because of the kameya the shitin shidi shama. After he wrote the kameya, what did he hear? Shama de kamaru panu menachem yacha. he heard the 16 Shittim say, okay, pack it up, we got to get out of here. Because the Kamei worked. Ketev Meriri. There's a pasuk that says Ketev Meriri, talking about Shittim. Let's read the pasuk inside. If I could find it. Okay, so Zok the Gemara Ketev Meriri is Trey Katvi Haver. There's two of them. Chad Mekame Tihara, Chad Mibasa Tihara. One hangs out before noon, and one after the afternoon. The Mekame Tihara Ketev Meriri Shmoy. He's called Ketev Meriri. Umechsi Kichada the Kimcha Vada Bebaksha. It looks like a bowl of this kutach that's a mixture of spoiled milk and flour and vinegar, and there's a spoon in it mixing it up. That's what he looks like. The Baza Tihara, the Ketev of the afternoon, is Ketev Yoncha Tzarayim Shmoy. That's his name. Umichse Bekarna de Iza Bahadur Beknafya. He looks like if there was some type of mesh wrapped around the horns of a goat. That's what he would look like. I've never seen one, so I can't explain any further. Abaya have a shekel, and I even looked in the article for pictures, and I couldn't find it. Abaya have a shekel v'ozil. Abaya was walking around. V'ozil Rapapa Yemini. Rapapa was on his right side. Rav Huna Rabbi Yeshua Mismoila, and Rav Huna was on his left side. Chajilahu Ketev Meriri. He saw this Ketev Meriri. The Ka'asala Pei Desmole. He was coming towards his left, which means he was coming, and who was vulnerable? Who was vulnerable? Who was vulnerable because he was coming towards the left. He had him switch positions. What am I, chopped liver? You're putting me as the palm in front of the shade instead of Rav Yeshua? No. Rav Papa was a very wealthy man. You right now in the massive of good muzzle. When things are going good, you're better protected against the shade, so that's why I'm putting you to confront him. Mechad b'Tammuz at Shitzer Bay, from the first of Tammuz until the 6th day of Tammuz, Vade Shchichi, there's a lot of them around, so you got to be careful. You can't velech, Sofik Shchichi, Sofik Lo Shchichi. After the 16th of Tammuz, the Sofik if they're around, the Shulchan Aruch actually says you shouldn't walk alone during this time at night because of this. U'mishtachi b'tulei the Chatzva. You could find them in the shade of a chatzva, the lechatzav garmida, in the shade of a barrel that's not properly covered. No, I'm sorry, it's a tree, the type of tree that that grows roots straight down. So you should use that tree or those grass to create the border around the Yisrael because the roots don't spread; they go straight down. And it's these types of grass that didn't grow yet on Amba. Uvetulu de tzafra upanya, the shade of the morning and the afternoon, will have a garmida that's not an Amba long. The ikar betulu de besekise, and most of them hang out in the shade of the besekise. Amar Bishop Hani Klas Mili Yahav Arvuna Lenahira. These things give blindness. Mandasark Reisha Yabesh. If one combs his hair when it's dry, umandashasi tif tif, and if someone drinks drips that are dripping out of a barrel, umandasayim misane, and somebody who takes off his shoes, ademaisna, one second. Mindasark Reishi Yavish, Mindashasi tif tif, umindasayim misane. What does this mean? I'm sorry. Someone who washes, he puts on his shoes, ademaisna kari, when his feet are still wet. So when you're in the mikveh, you have to make sure to dry your feet before you put them into your shoes. If you hang, Rashi says, if you hang bread in the air in your house, I'm not sure why you would hang bread in there, but if you hang bread in there, it's going to cause you to be poor. If you're hanging bread, then your mezainis is hanging. We're only saying that if you hang bread, if you hang meat or fish in your home, less lamba, there's no problem. That's the derech. If you have bran, more so if you have low quality bread, this only means if you can afford better and you buy a very low grade of food, even though you can buy better, then it's a bad timah for aniyus. Neshura bevesa, kasha la niyusa. A neshura in your house, which means purun shal pras. If you have crumbs on the floor, if your house is dirty, it causes aniyus. V'leila shabbosais u'v'leila reviyais. In Friday nights and Tuesday nights, sharu mazikin iluye, mazikin will impact him if he has crumbs in his house. Isra the mezoini nokit shemei. The malach in charge of giving parnasa, his name is Nokit. Nokit means cleanliness. So therefore, that's why crumbs are bad, dirt is bad. A clean house, if you're squeaky clean, that's going to induce the person in charge or the malach in charge of parnasa to come to your house and bring you more parnasa because he doesn't like dirt. Isra dan yusa novel shemei. The malach in charge of someone being poor, his name is filth. Let me see what time it is. It's already 65. I went way over. I'm sorry. So let's stop here. I was getting carried away in my shady business. Right,
So riveting.